Hola. Coming back to dream yoga, lucid dreaming. Coming back to the fundamental question, suffering, how can we get rid of it? Why are we vulnerable to suffering in our dream state when actually there's nothing there to cause the suffering? It's our own minds after all, but we certainly do suffer. And the short answer is because we don't understand what's going on and we get it wrong. First of all, we don't know, and secondly, we think we do know. We get it wrong, and as soon as you're non-lucid, then you're vulnerable to all manner of suffering. But insofar as you're lucid, nothing whatsoever in the dream has the power to inflict harm on you. Wouldn't make you suffer. Any more than reflections in a mirror would make you suffer, or images on a television screen. So, as for the dream, then we can ask in the waking state, right now, why are we vulnerable to suffering, especially the mental? And it's the same answer, because we are unaware of what's actually going on, the actual nature of existence, and then we're getting it wrong, misapprehending it, reifying everything, ripping reality into subject and object, into two utterly separate aspects and so forth. So then we ask, all right, how is it, this will be very short, we'll get to meditation actually very soon now, but really to the point. How is it that we don't know things? How is it that we are ignorant? And I'll give you three answers. I think each one is really very much to the point. We may not know something because we're just not even paying attention. That's a way of not knowing something. For the moment, what we attend to reality, if you're not paying attention, you'll not notice it, you'll not know it. So that's pretty straightforward. So part of it is just learning how to focus attention, if we'd like to know reality, and learn how not to ignore things, not to direct our attention away. Very briefly, when I was studying cognitive psychology at Stanford, it said in the introduction, we tried introspection, it didn't work, we're not going to do that anymore, and then went on for 500 pages and never even mentioned the fact that we can mentally perceive mental events. It never came up. I thought, wow, are you not paying attention? And so when it came to the exam time, I told the professor, I don't really want to take your exam, can I write a critique of the textbook instead? She said, yeah, why not, And she said, sure. And so I just ripped it. She gave me an A+. I thought that was a wonderful irony. I kid you not, truly. So that's just one thing, don't even pay attention. Then you won't see it, and then you'll be ignorant. But it gets more interesting when we go to cognitive blockages. That's an attentional blockage. You're not paying attention. Hey, pay attention. But then we can be looking at something. How can we look at something and not know it? And the answer is very short and will lead us directly to the meditation. An enormous application and implication for dream yoga and everything else we're doing here. I call these two kind of cognitive imbalances. We have it in Tibetan, Dodapa and Kurtepa, so it's already there and I'm taking it directly from Tibetan. But how is it that we can look at something and not even see it, not know it, when we're looking right at it? And one is our projections. That which we superimpose on reality may blind us to that which is actually there. So racism. If you're totally convinced that a certain race is simply inferior, unintelligent, lazy, what have you, whatever junk you would like to superimpose on them, then if they're not, you won't see it. Because oh no, after all, they're of this ethnic group. And then you just slap on. So we can be blind to things, even though it's right there in our face and in plain sight, but we won't see it because cognitively we've closed the door. Women just don't have the capacity for leadership, and higher education is wasted on them. They just don't have the ability. It's probably something in menstrual cycle. All this rubbish that people believed for centuries. And there it is, right? Your eldest child is a daughter and she's the brightest of all your kids, has greatest leader. No, don't see it. Oh, she's a girl. Where's the kitchen? So the ramifications are very, very deep, and those are only two examples. But we who are not misogynist and not racist, we're not invulnerable to this. I'm not. So there's one, it's called what I call a cognitive hyperactivity disorder. We're superimposing things on reality that just aren't there. We believe they're there, and it obscures from us what is there. And so we conflate our projections. We see that which isn't there because we're projecting it. And because of the cognitive projection, the cognitive closure, blockage, we see that which isn't there because we're projecting it and conflate our projection with what's there, and we don't see what is there because, again, cognitively we're blocking it. We just can't see it. It's right there. Anybody with 20/20 vision can see it perfectly clearly, and we can't. So those three things, you're not paying attention, you're not seeing it, because you're seeing what isn't there because you're projecting it. Transference, psychologists have studied this a lot. They know a lot about it. And then not seeing that which is in plain sight, again, because of a cognitive blockage, not because you're not paying attention. So if we are to overcome ignorance, the root of suffering, and overcome misapprehending reality that cause really getting in gear, then we need to train our way of apprehending reality in a way that we are withholding the projections. So that at least it's not black or white, but we can see more and more clearly what is reality dishing up from moment to moment, as opposed to what I'm superimposing upon it. And there are methods for that. And you can see the relevance of this for dream yoga, for our interpersonal relationships, and for everything. Seeing what is there, not seeing what's not there. So let's do a little simple exercise. It comes straight from the Buddha, and we will explore this experientially. And we take the first step in this regard with our now familiar preliminaries of releasing the mind, releasing the flow of awareness into a very attentive mode, discerning mode, but not caught up in thought and language. Let settle body, speech, and mind in the natural states. Now continue resting your awareness right where it is, utterly at rest, clear and cognizant, but not yet put into motion or put to work. Mindfully present, just that. And now as we venture into the main practice, I invite you to let your eyes be wide open. But keep your attention still. Rather than launching your attention out into the visual domain and looking at this and that and labeling this and thinking about that, stay home. Resting in your comfortable chair, awareness resting in its own place, and simply let the light of awareness illuminate this visual domain, this elliptical domain in which forms and colors appear. Attend to this visual field discerningly, intelligently. But with as little projection as possible, without superimposing names, concepts, conceptual associations. So as the Buddha said, in the scene, let there be just the scene. We are aware of these colors and forms by way of visual perception, arising independent upon the visual cortex. But we're also directing the flow of mental awareness to the same field. Visual perception remains perceptual, non-conceptual. But mental awareness very readily slips into conceptualization. So let's see if we can restrain that and continue to pay attention, to attend closely, but non-conceptually and as free as possible from projection. The conceptual mind says, oh, this is the sound of that. That's the sound of a person coughing. That's the sound of a bird. That's the sound of. We objectify. We conceptually designate. We label. That's not a problem. But let's try a second mode of knowing that is direct, unmediated, non-conceptual. In the visual appearances, see just visual appearances, because this is what reality is presenting, as opposed to what we are contributing or projecting. Now let's close the eyes and just rest for a moment. The king, the queen sitting upon the throne, mindful, clear, discerning, wide awake, but without focusing your attention here or there. And again, the immediate experience of being aware becomes more explicit. Now like a lighthouse that casts its light in one direction and then another, but does not move. Let your awareness not move, but direct the light of your awareness now to a second domain, the auditory domain, the domain of sound. Single-pointedly focus on that one domain. In the same way, in the herd, let there be just the herd. Nakedly be aware of whatever appearances arise, with as little superposition as possible. In letting there be just the seen in the scene. This implies, too, that we are not superimposing the notion of mine, my colors, my forms, because it should be quite evident they don't belong to anyone. Scientifically, photons strike the eye, the retina, begins an electrochemical sequence of events along the optic nerve, culminating the visual cortex, and the neural correlates of perception occur there. But there's no ownership. Shapes and colors are just shapes and colors. They have no owner. And likewise for sounds. Sound waves strike the eardrum, and so on. Sounds arise, but it's impersonal. They have no owner. They are there for you, but you don't own them. Observe them nakedly from moment to moment. Unadorned, unelaborated. Then withdraw the light of your mental awareness back into its ground, its home. Rest awareness right where it is. Self-knowing, self-illuminating. Withdrawing into the mental realm. Letting your awareness again remain still. But direct the light of your awareness, skipping over the olfactory and gustatory. Probably not much there of smells and tastes, so we'll skip them for the time being. And go directly to another field where there's plenty to attend to. The tactile field. That 1 out of 6 domains of experience in which tactile sensations arise: earth, water, fire, and air. But also feelings arise. Regions of the somatic space may be filled with discomfort, with pleasant feelings, neutral feelings. In the felt, let there be just the felt. The sensually perceived, just the perceived, as free as possible from any conceptual superimpositions. labels, thoughts, associations. Was it not evident that colors and shapes do not belong to you, even though they're there for you, and your perspective on them is unique? Nobody sees those shapes and colors from your perspective. And likewise, sounds, they don't belong to anyone, but they arise to your auditory perception. What about the tactile? We tend to very strongly identify with them. But is that a mere projection? Is there anything about tactile sensations, or even the feelings associated with them, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, that suggests that from their own side, by their own nature, they actually belong to you? They are really yours. Is that what reality presents to you, or is that purely a projection? In the tactily perceived, let there be just the tactily perceived, without visualization, without cogitation, nakedly, unadorned. Observe what arises in this somatic field from moment to moment. Even the notion of the body is a conceptual construct superimposed upon tactile sensations that are not a body, they're just tactile sensations. The body is physical, made of atoms, molecules, cells, but not these tactile sensations. They have no physical attributes at all, don't even exist in physical space. Again, withdraw the light of your awareness back into its home, its ground. Rest awareness right where it is. And now again, open the eyes, open all of the six sense doors. Visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. Let the light of your awareness illuminate all of these domains. In the sensed, let there be just the sensed. And now a question. We begin vipassana, which always entails some inquiry. Otherwise, it's just mindfulness. And that is, as your senses are all now wide open, awareness illuminating everything that arises, can you directly perceive with your mental awareness anything other than the contents of the 5 physical sense domains? Are there any other appearances to your awareness that are not by way of the five physical senses? Perhaps you already identified a number of non-physical, non-sensory appearances, such as discursive thoughts. You don't see them or hear them, but you can directly perceive discursive thoughts arising in the space of awareness. How about mental images? How about memories, fantasies? Mental feelings, can you observe them? Desires, do you only infer them, or can you actually witness them? That's just a short list. But all of these we call mental events, and they are not perceptible, not detectable in any of the five sensory domains. They're not detectable with any instrument of technology. These are the events that occur in the sixth cinema, the sixth domain, the domain of the mind. And we can observe them. From the stillness of awareness, we can observe the movements of the mind. A skill to be cultivated that can be of tremendous value. And then the Buddhist refrain, in the mentally perceived, let there be just the mentally perceived. Without superimposing labels, conceptual constructs, and perhaps most importantly, without superimposing that which isn't there, namely mine. Are these not just thoughts, images, desires, emotions that arise independent upon prior causes and conditions, but they do so without your being involved in any way? You didn't do it. They simply arise and they have no owner. Is that the case or not? Investigate closely. Sustain this mindful presence without distraction, without being carried away by appearances, without grasping, without identifying with, fusing your awareness with the activities of the mind. By identifying with them, release that tendency. And like an unflickering candle flame, let the still, bright light of your awareness illuminate the mind, but without fusing with the appearances and activities of the mind. So we have just about 5 minutes before we really need to go off to lunch, show our respect for our hosts here. I'd like to share with you one, I believe, really brilliant insight. And it goes back to what Dambala, Dharmakirti Dignaga, 6th century, 7th century, pretty close. So give or take, 6th century, 7th century, that's how old this insight is, this discovery. Probably earlier, but we know two major proponents of Buddhist epistemology are these two Indian scholar contemplatives. And here's a simple point. Here's the hypothesis. This is science, not philosophy, not religion. You can check it out, see for yourself. That is, it can be accessed experientially, not just logically or by relying on authority. That's what I mean by that. Here's the assertion. That when we open our eyes and we see something afresh, close your eyes and open your eyes, in that first instant, and I won't try to demarcate exactly how long that first instant is, very short. In that first instant, in that immediate contact with appearances, it can be visual, auditory, tactile, whatever you like. In that first instant, what we're just getting is unadulteratedly, without any, additives, what's reality dishing up to your visual perception, tactile, auditory, what have you. In that first instant, we're just getting the appearances. In the second instant, as we're directing our mental awareness, let's say, for example, to the visual field, so now we have a coupling. Mental awareness is piggybacking on top of visual perception. And in the first instant, it's just getting what's reality presenting, but in the second instant, then the conceptual mind involuntarily and very rapidly clicks in and starts to make sense of things. And that's not a bad thing. We're not just looking, what? We're seeing, and then we're making sense of, oh yes, there's Tenzin, oh yes, there's Nicola, oh yes, there's John. And so in that second instant, visual perception, for example, remains visual perception. It's just picking up colors and forms, colors and shapes. But the mental awareness that's piggybacking on it is then superimposing labels, drawing forth memories, associations, and so forth. And what's very important about this, it's not a bad thing, but where we can get really into trouble is as we're conceptually then engaging with, the mental awareness is now conceptual. It's operating within the framework of language, of concepts, of memory, imagination, expectation, and so forth. That the grist for the mill of the conceptual mind is called in Tibetan Dunshi. Again, it goes back like 1400 years. And the Dunshi, it's translated sometimes very clunky way. I think the most accurate that I can come up with is generic idea. A generic idea. The ideas we have. The ideas we have. And the ideas we have, if I say George Bush, younger one, George Bush, any ideas come up? The ideas that come up, or Thatcher, or Blair. We all know these names, and you know a lot more than I do. But ideas come up immediately. If I said this today, and you said it today, but I said it a week ago, and I said it a week from now, how different do you think the associations will be, the ideas? Donald Trump. Much different yesterday than today, or a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago? The point here is that these generic ideas, it can be of a person. I was just shooting some hot points that will probably have some ideas and opinions, but it's also just bland things like roses, beefsteak, porridge. The assertion here is that the ideas that we have, that we superimpose upon experience, are relatively static. It's not to say they never change. Our ideas about things, people, individual, and so forth and so on, clearly they can change. But until they change, they don't. They're relatively static. People who are suffering from low self-esteem, some of you perhaps, at least you know what I'm talking about. The ideas we have about ourselves can be quite static. I am, and then we start giving some adjectives, and the same adjectives that were used a week ago, and a month ago, and so forth. The ideas we superimpose upon reality are relatively static, and then we fuse them with what reality is actually dishing up. Buddhist premise. Everything that is appearing to all 6 doors of perception we just ignore. Modern psychology is largely ignoring. I think this will change soon, because they're obviously not seeing something that's so obviously present. We mentally perceive things. We're not just thinking, we're perceiving. And so here's a Buddhist premise. Everything that directly presents itself to your 6 doors of perception. This is a hypothesis. Please don't just believe it, and then it's dead on arrival. But everything that's appearing to your 6 doors of perception, mental images appearing, visual, auditory, etc., all arising momentarily, all in a constant state of flux. Nothing static, nothing enduring, nothing immutable, all fizzing, moment to moment, all in a constant state of flux. Tactile sensations, smells, they're not static. It's a smell. Very obvious with visual perception, because we have these beams of photons striking the retina and then setting up just an ongoing flux of neurophysiological correlates of visual perception, which means it's never static. The photons don't just come and sit. It's always a constant stream of impermanence. And so what we are experiencing immediately by way of the 6 doors of perception, what reality is presenting is always in a state of flux. And there are no repeat performances. It's always fresh, always new, always like that. But then we superimpose the generic ideas, and they're static. They can sit there for a year and not be different. Not significantly different. They can change. But until they do, they don't. And so when we fuse, and we just do this involuntarily, fuse our generic ideas with what reality is dishing up, then we can easily conflate the static with that which is not static. And we can say things like, "Oh, you again. How do you like to be greeted that way?" And what the person has just told you is, "I don't really care what you are now. What I remember is all that counts, and it's you again." Well, the person just stepped the door you've never seen before. You may know the person for 20 years, but this version, you've never seen this one before. It may be very similar to yesterday's version, but maybe not. But insofar as we engage in this cognitive hyperactivity disorder of fusing the static memories, generic ideas, opinions, assumptions, preconceptions, insofar as we superimpose and fuse these static conceptual projections upon the vibrancy and the ever-freshness of a reality is dishing up, then to that extent we are ignorant and deluded. And that can be a real problem. So we'll return to this. It's now 12:30, so I'll be respectful here, as I always want to be. This is going to turn out to be enormously juicy. Because in Buddhist tradition, when it said, ignorance is the root of suffering, delusion is the root of suffering, when you're going deep and asking what's really deep here, it's always the projecting of that which isn't there. That's really the root of it. We'll see that more. So this is going to get really juicy really fast, and enormous relevance to dream yoga. Because if you're seeing things in a dream as those are real people, I'm really here, this is really happening, that's all a projection. Because all the dream is dishing up are empty appearances that are free creations of your own substrate consciousness. So this is where we're going. And so you see, I've been very sharp, very critical of materialism, because I think it deserves it. I don't criticize materialists, they're people, and they can change their mind any day. But materialism is relatively static. And I'll take my sword and cut it. But now we're going into Buddhism, and I'm going to do the same thing that Buddhist philosophers have been doing for 2,000 years. We're going to look at multiple Buddhist viewpoints and take out the same sword and cut it. See what withstands scrutiny and what doesn't. And we're going to be cutting down a lot of trees in the process. And see what stands. What stands up to our most critical investigation, most skeptical investigation. What still remains standing when we launch into it with intelligence and perceptiveness. I hope you enjoy this. I will. So at least one person can enjoy this a lot. Come along for a ride if you like. I'll see you at 2:30.